Welcome to the Andy Staples Show. This is an addition to the episode we have already recorded today, Ari, because we talked Jim Harbaugh in that episode, but that was before the news came out that Michigan had received a notice of allegations involving some stuff, analyst coaching, improper contacts during a dead period. But the big one, Jim Harbaugh accused of misleading NCAA investigators, and boy, that took us down memory lane.
Yeah, well, we're wearing the same stuff, so that's good, and we're full of tacos. But it did, Andy. I remember I was a year into being a journalist.
You're covering Ohio State
when this happened, and I remember the feeling.
You're talking about Jim Tressel.
In 2011. The feeling of what was going on there and the magnitude of that because of the temperament of the sport at the time. Any NCAA violation or anything
it was a huge deal.
Like weeks, months of the main story. So tonight when I read the notice of allegations that Michigan received and that the big number one violation and not the two violations was that Jim Harbaugh was non-cooperative or misled the NCAA, I had a flashback going back to 21-year-old self in my room, like afraid to go out to like the press conference. Because when you were a kid, when you first started doing this, like how everything was so much, and I was just like working at a small town place and no one was reading it anyway, but like it was such a big deal. And now that I'm like 35 years old and this is 11 years ago now or whatever it is, like I just laughed. Like, is that like when I read this? Like I was like,
no, because the world has changed too.
Yeah.
So I was working at SI. I'd been at SI for about 3 years when this happened. And I remember writing stories. I never wrote anything that said Jim Tressel should be fired, but I had enough people telling me, people who either worked at the NCAA or who worked at schools who had been through similar investigations, they're like, dude, they're going to fire him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? They're like, yeah. And I did a study using the NCAA's database. This was in March of 2011. And there were, I think, something like 82 cases where a coach or an athletic director had been accused of misleading NCAA investigators. And so like 79 of them had been fired over it.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
It was wild. It was considered kind of the mortal sin. Like the one, if they couldn't catch you red-handed doing what they were accusing you of, if they caught you red-handed lying, that was it. Now we're looking at it like, if it does separate Jim Harbaugh from Michigan, my guess is it's because he takes an NFL job, not because he gets fired over it.
It's just like, I don't know. It's so easy to just be like, who cares? Like, because I literally don't care.
No.
At all. And it's such a different perspective than what it was like 11 years ago.
If you're an Ohio State fan, you care because a coach you probably really liked got canned over this, when now everybody's like, well, who cares? This isn't a big deal. It was interesting. I was reading up on, reading some of the old stuff I wrote back then, and I had completely forgotten. That was the same year that Bruce Pearl got fired. So Bruce Pearl got fired from Tennessee a few months before Jim Tressel got fired at Ohio State. Same thing, lying to NCAA investigators. It was actually Ohio State was involved. Well, not involved, but a player who wound up playing for Ohio State. It was, did Aaron Kraft come to a cookout, not a barbecue, a cookout?
Yeah, I remember this now.
At Bruce Pearl's house. And Pearl got caught. Pearl got fired by Tennessee. I think firing Bruce Pearl ultimately cost Mike Hamilton the AD job at Tennessee. But like you flash forward a few years and not all the way to now, but when the FBI thing happens, Chuck Person was on Bruce Pearl's staff at Auburn, got arrested by the FBI, and there was this big investigation, and Auburn did everything it could to back Bruce Pearl in that one.
Right.
And I'm imagining Michigan will do everything to back Jim Harbaugh in this one.
Yeah, I just like, there's a certain faction of fans, Andy, that will be, the rules are in place for a reason. Don't break the rules, do things the right way. Right. But sometimes these rules are so hard to follow. And like, listen, the COVID one, if you go back and like look at things that I said during that time,
about that, like with Herm Edwards, with
and
Air
that's
Force
a
did
big
it, I think.
deal if you're going to do things that, are negative in terms of public safety. But like all these level 2 violations, I think they signed 4 total top 100 players the last 2 years combined. Like what did any of this stuff even do to benefit them?
Right, they're not committing what the NCAA would consider mortal sins.
Yeah, and also too, like anything that Michigan accomplished the last 2 years, I would probably say that 0% of that was lifted or boosted by anything that is being discussed in these allegations.
But it's
just like what are we
even doing here?
What are we even doing here? Yeah, like it's like I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe is it just the NCAA's day is done?
Yes. Yeah. The world has changed. And I remember the first thing I wrote off that Ohio State thing when all that stuff first came out. And this is before I knew about the Tressel stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This is before that had become public. But the first thing I wrote, I think the first 3 words of the column were GoPro now. And I was talking about Terrell Pryor and DeVere Posey and the players who'd been caught up in that whole thing. Because I just thought it was stupid that they were getting vilified for selling their own possessions. And
which, by the way, how can you even in America stop somebody from doing that?
But you know what pissed me off the most about all of that is that they're saying this thing's so bad, but the Big Ten and Ohio State cooked up a way for those guys to play in the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, right.
Because they needed to win against Arkansas.
Yeah. Well, they wanted the television race. They got suspended retroactively. You got to play in the game. That's the money grab.
Yeah.
And then after we grab the money, then you can go and play.
Then you're suspended for 5. The other thing that really pissed me off about that one is, didn't the NFL make Terrell Pryor sit 5 games?
Yes. He had to do the supplemental draft.
He didn't even break a law. He didn't break a law.
Like, what if he would have come back? Like, what if he would have come back and developed for another year? I don't know. Like, sometimes you wonder. And like Terrell Pryor was a legitimate number 1 receiver for a year with the Browns.
Nice career.
Yeah, I mean, but I just like wonder, like, anybody whose career was off track because of that, it's just so unbelievably un-American. Like really, when you have the perspective that you have now, like I wish I knew what I knew now back then, because the column I would write is, why are we mad about this? Like, did anybody write that in 2011, or would it have just been like such a absurd thought?
I wrote about how one thing I wrote when they had Tressel resign was essentially Ohio State is throwing him under the bus.
Yeah.
Like, and then I wrote because I went to his committee on infractions hearing, which we're not allowed into, but I was at the hotel in Indianapolis where it was happening. I wrote that if you think that Ohio State's not getting penalized, they did, because they had to fire Jim Tressel.
Yeah, they lost their coach.
Like, now, no one could have known that Urban Meyer would make them better.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it worked out for Ohio State.
At the time, when you have to get rid of a guy who's as successful as Tressel, that's a huge penalty.
Yeah, it just is just remarkable about, the fact that he was there for, a decade, and the stuff that he did while he was there on the field. They won a national title. They beat Michigan, I believe, was it 8 or 9 times? From a coaching perspective, the man was peak Ohio State nirvana. He understood the place. He understood the traditions. He grew up if you're looking for a coach that has ties to your university and that's like a thing that we talk about with it. Like, Tressel fit Ohio State at that time like a glove. And then you can't talk about him now without mentioning that.
Well, and I wonder the end of his world. Remember, what is he now? He's a university president.
Yeah, so, I think is he still? He might have became Youngstown State's president. Was Youngstown State's president. Yeah. I'm not saying his life was over, but obviously he didn't want to stop being Ohio State's coach. And I always feel bad for people who have careers in something where they do something forever or for a long period of time, they become beloved, and then they make a mistake, and then they are no longer that person to the place that they gave their life to.
I don't think they are. I think Jim Tressel still is that person. To most
yes, and I hope so, but I think he should be that person to everybody else too.
So Craig Smith, interesting, and Craig's right on this. Other than a Dave Bliss, which is the Baylor basketball, Jerry Sandusky or Art Browse type of situation, where felonies are being committed within a program, are there any sins a program could commit that would truly merit NCAA sanctions? Well, the thing is, the felony stuff doesn't merit NCAA sanctions either, because that's not the NCAA's bailiwick. That's not what they do. But I do think, and this is interesting that Craig brings this up. So just from a timing perspective, when did the Sandusky stuff come to light?
That was a few years after.
November 2011.
Oh, it was the same year?
Same year. I think that changed the view on all this stuff.
Because you look at those 3 scandals that he just posted up on the thing there.
Who really cares about this other stuff?
Who cares about what Terrell Pryor did? He didn't even ever get a tattoo. Like, who cares what he did when you're talking about actual real life disgusting felonies? And the thing that, I tried to reach out to Terrell, and I talked to him a few times on Twitter while the COVID stuff was happening. to try to get him to talk to me about how dumb it is. And he never followed through with an interview. But like, I do feel bad for some of those guys. He wasn't allowed to come to Ohio State for a while.
Yeah.
His
like
relationship
not being allowed to go to
his relationship
USC.
with Ohio State is fractured. I think when I covered them for 9 more years after that happened, and I don't think I ever saw him there once.
Yeah.
It's like, why? Because he sold stuff that belonged to him?
Yeah, it is truly amazing. So let's get this back to Harbaugh.
Yeah.
You'll hear later in the show where I'm reacting to Jim Harbaugh's statement from Thursday, which obviously came out knowing all this other stuff was about to come out.
Sure. Yep.
Does this change anything for you on that?
I mean, the only thing that could change, I guess, is if we're still in a place where you believe that Michigan takes this as seriously as or half as seriously as we did 11 years ago.
I don't think they will.
And if they don't, then it really doesn't change anything for me.
I think they should be like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, if he wants to take an NFL job,
what are they going to do? Suspend him for 3 games?
Even then, who would even care if they're non-conference schedules?
If it's like this past year's, it really doesn't matter.
So I don't know. And it's just like, also too, like the buzz online about it. There's people talking about it or whatever, but it's like, could you imagine if this same thing happened in 2011? It would be the same thing that happened. Maybe not as severe.
It is amazing how fast it all fell apart for the NCAA in terms of its power and just societally,
people to start catching on.
How much
they did.
How much we care about this stuff. If you want to read something that feels really strange now, go back and read the Sports Illustrated game story on Florida State winning the national title after the 1993 season.
Okay.
They make those guys getting a chance to go to Foot Locker and buy some stuff sound like they had committed murder.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's the greatest scandal in American history. I mean, like when you think about it,
it's incredible.
Or not scandal. I mean, it's
scam.
It's scam. Yeah, that's what I meant. Racket.
It's basically them trying to keep the athletes,
because it's not only it hasn't ever always just been against the rules.
Yeah,
it's the criminalization of a very normal activity.
Right.
I sold Jordans on eBay.
Values. Yes, exactly.
Am I like a bad person because I sold a pair of shoes online? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And if I want a ring and I wanted to sell it, then it's my prerogative to do that. It's my ring.
Exactly. And so I'm glad everybody's gotten this figured out. This does retroactively make me feel bad for Jim Tressel.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes like to picture him like in his house. And this isn't the first time that something like this has happened that you can correlate back to him.
Right.
But he's like probably like laying there next to his wife. Like, how stupid.
I know.
Like, could you imagine the stress that family was under 10 years ago?
And if this had happened even 5 years later, it just would have been
whatever. Yeah. So, I feel bad that, the world works the way that it works, but like, who would have known if they would have stayed,
so
10 more years?
If you're Harbaugh though, and now you're dealing with this and clearly this is something he's had to deal with in the previous few months, do you just go, okay, fine, I'll go coach the Colts, and they don't ask me about this stuff?
I mean, if that's the type of thing that, somebody tweeted on the internet, like, have you ever asked Jim Harbaugh a question like on a teleconference?
I've been in his office.
So, but that setting would be different because if you're talking one-on-one.
Still.
Have you ever tried to get him just to answer a benign question about anything?
He doesn't.
He doesn't cooperate with just like, so how did you guys recruit
right
Michigan this year?
Yeah, so he's not going to do it.
So how's he going to cooperate with the NCAA?
Exactly.
Do you think he cares?
Yeah.
So like, it's just, he's a different type of cat, and he approaches questions in the way that they should be answered in his own way.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether they're
now,
inflammatory or not.
Excuse not telling the truth.
No, of course not. And it's like, I don't know, like there is a line here of like, do you just completely dismiss it and say, I don't care? Or is there a penalty
there's a
ramification?
There's a penalty, but I don't think it's going to be anything anybody considers serious if there's a penalty.
Yeah, but is a 3-game suspension serious?
I think it's pretty serious in terms of what we're talking about.
Yeah, but like I would think that that's a pretty serious penalty.
It feels like it fits.
Yeah,
or maybe even a little strong.
That's what I'm saying.
But
like maybe
11 years ago, it would have been like, oh, he's getting fired. And seriously, 11 years ago, the same thing happens. If it's the Michigan coach instead of the Ohio State coach, the same thing would have happened. The coach would have been fired.
Well, the funny thing too is when you think about the allegations that he supposedly was misleading about. Mm-hmm. If he would have just been like, yeah, we did it.
Yeah, who cares?
Like nothing would have happened. Right. So like, what's the point of even lying?
And that's the same thing with the Tressel stuff.
Yeah,
which maybe he didn't realize that at the time.
Well, at the time, I think what he was trying to do was to isolate his player, or to shield his players from the NCAA,
but
because he didn't want them
realizing they were already caught.
They were already caught.
Yeah.
And then he got caught up trying to protect his
that's
players.
What that was.
Yes.
That's what those questions. I remember reading those transcripts and going, oh, well, the investigators already knew this stuff. They're just trying to see if he'll lie about it.
Yeah. And he stepped into the trap. But like, if you were ever to ask Jim Tressel in an honest moment, I don't know that he's ever discussed this on the record with anybody, but I think that his point of view was, this is a problem. They can't be doing this, but the NCAA acts irrationally about this. I'm not throwing them under the bus.
No, I understand.
We'll handle this the way we want to handle it. They're selling their own stuff. And then what that turned into was because his relationship with Terrell Pryor was unlike any relationship with the player that I think he had otherwise.
Right.
And I think almost like borderline father figure to him. And I understand, like, if that was my kid or my player, I might have done the same thing. So
and that's the thing. He didn't have very good advice. And I think now the coaches come more equipped because they hire their own lawyers instead of the school providing, the compliance guy just saying, do this, now do this. So I don't think that would have happened in a more sophisticated environment.
Right.
So it's very strange, and we'll have to see what happens with Jim Harbaugh down the road. Like we say later in the podcast, the NFL's Black Monday is coming up this coming Monday. Jobs will be open. We'll see if he actually interviews for him. That statement came out Thursday, knowing all this other stuff.
5 hours earlier.
Yeah, knowing all this other stuff was coming out. So I still think it means he plans to be at Michigan.
I think it would be a travesty if this thing was the reason why he decided to leave.
Well, we'll see how people react. Judging by the public reaction, it's not 11 years ago.
Seems pretty benign. Yep.
Yeah. So we will talk to you again. We'll talk to you again on Friday, and going to experience the LA Taco experience with us on Friday, and you're going to really, really enjoy that.